I've had this journal for a long time, and at first, my wife got it, paid more for paperweight more than anything else. But I decided to bring it out now since there seems to be something going on. Recently, Topham signed an agreement for this big new nuclear power plant the government is building on the Brendan branch between the docks and Sudbury. Of all the places they could have put it, they had to put it near the most beautiful line, in my opinion. That's going to affect tourism, and that's probably why the big man signed that contract to take nuclear waste to and from the mainland. It's got to regain that money somehow. Anyways, besides that, nothing's changed. Diesel engines are becoming more and more often to Vicarstown, while steam engines rarely take the trains. When they do take the trains from the mainland, they're usually rusted and worn. Shame those engines don't have a place like Sodor to stay. What else? Edward's doing fine, and he's got a similar opinion to me on the power plant. He says it's going to be an eyesore, but he does like the idea of doing more work. I'm currently writing this while we wait for the all clear at the platform, so I'll keep this book in the cab if we spot anything else going on. Well, as I said, if there was something weird going on, I'd write about it, and it seems that I was right. While I was talking to Leonard at the docks about how his son's birthday went, we could hear sirens blaring in the distance. Luckily for us, Edward needed to go light engine back to Sudbury to pick up his next train anyways. We found out the sounds of the sirens we were hearing were coming from the power plant, and we saw Fireface speed past us when the line met the road side by side. When I got home this evening, I turned on the telly and found out that it was a drill, in case there was a contamination breach. Gotta say, if they needed to do a drill and they need that many fire trucks, I don't think having that plant's a safe thing to have on this island. God damn it, I knew it would happen. We were at Wellsworth when it happened, and I heard a loud explosion. The sky went dark, and this huge cloud was visible in the distance. Charlie and I knew exactly where that came from, and we knew we had to go. People cleared the platform faster than I had ever seen before. We knew the shockwave would be coming fast, so we alerted the guard, and luckily he had seen what we saw. He blew his whistle, and we released the brakes, hit the regulator, and pulled on the whistle for dear life, hoping that Cedric was still in signal box to set the points. Thank God he was, because without him, we would have been killed. We sped down the line at speeds we've never gone before. We passed Donald, who was heading the opposite way, pulling slow goods. We found out later that he didn't make it out alive. Neither did William or Colin in his cab. Edward was probably the most horrified out of all of us, and I don't blame him. While we all had some layer of protection, he didn't, so that probably motivated him to go faster. We shot past Crosby, and that's when the shockwave hit us. And Jesus, it was strong. It caused the glass in the carriage to shatter and rocked them to the side. Edward's front pony truck also derailed on the points because of it, but those things didn't stop us. We could feel the heat rising, but we didn't stop until we got to Knapford. Luckily, we made it safely and huddled everyone in station buildings and offices. We heard on the radio that the entirety of Brenda was hit by the explosion, and the death toll was unknown. I hope to God Linda got out of there alive, but that's a slim chance. It's been almost 6 hours of this damn station, and no one's received any word on whether or not it's safe to go out yet. I've been feeling so much guilt over leaving Edward out on the station like that. I hope to God he's alright. A crowd of people forced their way out of the ticket office next to us to raid MC Button to get some food to eat. Something got to them. We had them screaming in fear, and they didn't get back to the room. We covered all the windows with drapes and blankets so that we didn't get hurt if something else happened, like another explosion or something. I really hope they're okay. He was okay. I couldn't believe it. Edward was still there. He was scared, and some of the coaches were badly burned, but he was okay. Me and Charlie knew what to do. We grabbed some of Topham's coats and bolted as fast as we could. Edward was low on coal, but he did have enough water to make it to Tidmouth. If engines would be hiding anywhere on the island, it's there. We were shocked to see James pull up to the station with empty coaches. He seemed pretty pent up about something, since he was taking his anger out on Edward. Not sure what was on his mind at the time, but Joseph told me they left half the train at the platform instead of getting them all aboard before the blast hit them. But by the way he was acting, James definitely saw something the rest of us didn't. Felix told us he received a radio transmission that the mainland ordered the Vicarstown rolling bridge to be dismantled as soon as possible, as this pandemic has worsened. We need to get as far as possible. Also, on his way over, he and James passed the sheds. They apparently heard Thomas's whistle from in the inside, with the cries of a saddened soul accompanied with it. Some disgusting mutated trucks had jammed the turntable with their body, so he's probably trapped in there for a while. Those trucks somehow gained the ability to move themselves down the line, which is probably going to lead to the lines being blocked later on. After laying about in the station for an hour, we thought it was time we left. Instead of heading to Tidmouth, we thought it would be better to try and make it to the bridge. Felix and I were talking about how crazy it was to run away from such a disaster. We got a call from an unnamed signalman about Boco. We found that he came back to Sodor after taking a goods train from the mainland and went straight to Brendan docks. Nobody told Frank and Marshall, so they drove him straight into the contaminated area. I've been told they haven't come out of there alive. While we were heading down the line, Edward had to stop for water. Felix made sure James didn't slow down and shot past us, hoping to get across to the mainland. However, they went down the wrong line and went straight to Sudbury. I haven't seen them since. Cindy and I decided to check in Wellswood Station for something to eat, but we didn't even take a step off Edward's footplate when we saw the shattered glass everywhere. It looked like some broke into the building, so it could have been looters. We got a call from Jem Cole on my two-way radio. We got one for us and one for him, so we could talk whenever we wanted, and for Trevor and Edward to keep in touch. Anyways, he took shelter in a bunker underneath his shed. His wife and child were okay too. Poor Trevor, though. The blast got him bad. Jim had his rifle on him and put the truction engine out of his misery. Edward broke down when I told him the news. We decided to sleep inside Edward's cab. It might be risky, but it's less hazardous than sleeping in a building with tons of shattered glass. Luckily, we still have a fire blanket in the cab, so we use that. I hope this nightmare ends soon. We woke up to the sound of rain pelting on top of Edward's cab. We were surprised he didn't tell us or complain about how wet he was getting. But either way, we got up. We started getting his fire ready, and noticed we're only half full with his coal capacity. Then, to our surprise, we saw Percy shoot past us with what seemed to be Annie and Clarabelle, along with a single troublesome truck on the back. They seemed to be completely unscathed, and didn't even stop to check on us. As we traveled down the line, we decided to check the Kildane Ironworks just to look for survivors, and sadly, no one was there. The only thing that remained was the hollowed-out corpse of another engine, whose shape was all too familiar. There was only one Great Western pannier tank engine on the island, and we knew we had lost Duck. He had no eyes and a gaping hole in his forehead. Just the mere sight of it made me want to vomit. Several pieces had been ripped off him. He was missing a side rod and a few sections of handrails. To add to that, it seemed as though the whole engine was completely hollow. Boiler tubes, water tanks, and bunker, all empty. Hell, even the ashes at the bottom of his firebox were gone. We decided to leave, and while doing so, we spotted the Ironworks twins. They were empty shells tossed aside of the line. We didn't stick around for long. We went down the line on Kildane, and we couldn't believe what we saw. Henry and a bunch of workmen from Brendan were safe as can be in a good shed. Henry was overjoyed to see Edward, but seemed to be a bit focused on something else. They talked about the things they saw and how thankful they were to have survived. I asked Paul how Henry wasn't mutated. The reason he survived and hasn't been affected by the mutation is because of his special coal. The hopper he used the day prior was his old special Welsh coal, and he had to take a few coal trucks as well as his fish during his usual weekly kipper run, and thankfully he used to keep him alive through the week. We then noticed how many people were in the sheds. I counted around 23 people, excluding Edward and Henry. We decided to stick together and spend the night with them. Henry's crew ride on the front of his footplate behind this wooden shield they made from an old truck. They used to run down the line to see if they can find anyone who needs assistance, but stopped 2 days ago when they tried to make their way to the ironworks. An engine was blocking their path, but they were too busy going the other way to properly see it. Apparently, several engines have passed by here recently. Henry had noticed Percy pass by yesterday morning, and the night before, Gordon shot past. He didn't say anything, but Henry could hear him trying to scream. But all that came out was the sound of whistling coming through the holes in his face. We lost Frederick last night. Damn engine went after the poor guy. He thought he was safe away from the tracks. Boy, was he wrong. Some workmen found his body in the shed this morning after hearing him scream. Anyways, we're preparing ourselves to move out this morning. People have loaded side plates onto Henry for added protection. We leave in an hour. We woke up about 50 minutes ago, and we've started firing up the engines. Henry's side plates were fitted and ready to go. We've got a diagram for the consistent from last night with the optimal order of rolling stock and engines to travel with. It'll start with an open wagon made of metal, followed by Henry, who's our wall of defense. Then, 2 coal trucks will follow, full of Welsh coal. Edward will follow suit with a coal truck of his own, and pulling the vans with the survivors and workmen. If something happens, Edward can be uncoupled and make a getaway. Workmen are currently covering Henry and Edward's boilers with tarp to camouflage with the surroundings. Hopefully, we'll be able to get to the next station safely. It's been 15 minutes since we've departed. We're keeping the fires as low as possible so no attention could be drawn to us. So far, we haven't seen anything living, only the fog rolling in, and the swaying corpses of dead trees. It's freakishly eerie. So much just happened, and only lots of space to write. While heading away from Kildane, we spotted what seemed to be a train off the line. Upon closer inspection, it was actually Percy, who was derailed in a ditch. Both Henry and Edward were in shock when they saw him. He was breathing, but his breath were extremely weak, and his jaw was broken and dislocated. Blood was dripping out of his mouth. I couldn't look at it. I felt like I was going to vomit. Annie and Clarabelle were still with him, as well as the truck from earlier. To our surprise, that truck was the one that used to belong to the S.C. Ruffy Ballast Company, located at Tidmouth before it went bankrupt. Scruffy was then used as any other seven-plank wagon. Clarabelle and Annie were nervous and visibly scared. They finally calmed down after Henry told them to take some breaths, and they told us what happened. Apparently, Percy wanted to leave the island as fast as possible and rushed his way across, filling up his tank outside of Kildane before continuing his sprint. However, the night before, a creature chased them down the line. The thing was huge and wouldn't stop chasing them. They didn't see the points and ran right into the siding where Percy derailed. The passengers inside the coaches all opened the doors and ran like mice, but the beast finished them off with some sort of tendril. Right before the beast was about to attack the loco and rolling stock, Gordon shot past, and the beast chased him instead. That was all the two could remember. Scruffy was definitely horrified by what he saw too, and didn't really talk. Alex and Peter were resting inside Clarabelle, and we brought them aboard our train. We found out the reason why the coaches weren't mutated was because radiation does not affect wood, and since their faces were meshed into the walls of the coach, they were perfectly fine. Scruffy, on the other hand, was graced by being filled with Welsh coal. We couldn't just leave them there, so we uncoupled them and pulled them off the siding. We all wanted to get Percy too, but his injuries were beyond what we could fix. No one could bring themselves together to put him out of his misery, so we decided to leave him there. We pulled Annie, Clarabelle, and Scruffy back to the Kildane yard. We didn't dare look back, because we only feel more guilty for not doing it. We decided to play it safe and think of a strategy. Scruffy thought he saw Toad behind that creature, wailing for him to stop. Scruffy then started thinking about a rescue mission. The plan would be Edward would lure the beast out of the ironworks with Scruffy. Knowing the history between them, he would be the perfect bait. When we get that thing out of his nest, Henry would charge in and grab Toad. We'll get a workman to control the massive bucket crane, and when Oliver gets lured back into the ironworks, we'll strike him, and hopefully knock that beast out. We'll try it in a day or two, but first, we need to find some food. Change of plans. We might have a problem. Scruffy has a wheel flat on his rear axle. This might be a problem for us if we to have his plan work out in the end. We also heard cries for help in the smelters. God knows who it might be, but we'll have to investigate soon, or else we might lose more men. We were woken up abruptly by the sound of people arguing. It seems like someone took Scruffy while we were sleeping last night. I'm shocked no one heard an engine come by, considering Paul and Garrett was supposed to be watching and keeping us alert for oncoming engines. Paul and Garrett have gone missing too. They never came back last night, which worries me. That thing must have taken them. With Scruffy missing, we're gonna have to move along down the line. We'll have to come back later to look for survivors, if that's the case. We decided to try and trek back up to Tidmouth. We completely ignored the people and engines there, so it would be at best to at least look for more survivors. Henry and others will stay on guard with Annie and Clarabelle, so the workmen will have a place to sleep. Hopefully, we won't be too long. We found a survivor. It was Leonard. Thank God he wasn't feeling good and stayed home on the 4th, or God knows what would have happened to him. I thought we lost him, but we passed by his house, and he was waiting at the signal for any signs of life or locomotive. We approached the sheds, and I almost fainted like Leonard did. We were just stopping to fill Edward's tank, but we never expected to find Thomas. He was horribly mutilated and extremely sad, but despite those attributes, he was almost the same engine we knew and loved. He was completely dried from water, even though he was just beside the water tower. What was most unusual, though, was the fact that the turntable had been cleared of all trucks that had jammed it, as Felix described previously. Maybe someone pulled them out? Thomas didn't want to talk much, but we knew he was extremely grateful. After Leonard gained consciousness, he marveled at the sight in front of him. After a bit of discussion, he decided to stay with Thomas until we returned up the line. We were planning to only head up to the junction and back, since that's a fairly high traffic area. We gave him an apple and a tin, which he could use at a makeshift canteen. We parted ways and headed down the line. What a day for surprises. We found a lonely Toby waiting lonesomely at Tidmouth. He was near some empty coaches, which seemed to have been evacuated. He seemed scared and was mumbling to himself repeatedly. We approached him, but he kept reversing. Maybe this whole thing has taken a toll on him. Wouldn't be surprised. Well, it seems Toby was basically unharmed from the radiation, which is quite peculiar. Toby wasn't doing well mentally, though. He kept stammering to himself, saying things like how it wasn't his fault, and how he wants to leave himself be. I'm still unsure of what he meant by that, but he's probably just super stressed. We examined the coaches, which were the red and cream fast passenger services ones that James was pulling earlier. Did he leave half his train behind? I don't recall seeing a brake coach on his train, so that might have been the case. It also explains why there was so much luggage loose on the platform. The fog started to roll in, and it's making things difficult. We decided to raid the station to see if any food was being stored within the offices or something. There's gotta be something good here. Everything happened at once. My hand is shaking right now, and I'm barely able to write. Alright, things have calmed down, and I think I'm able to write now. We found a few pastries inside of the station, but they were pretty stale. Either way, they tasted pretty well. We wanted to ask Toby what happened to him when the blast happened. He seemed petrified, but also on the verge of tears. He told us he had to leave Henrietta at Croven's Gate for a few days to get replacement windows. On the day of the blast, he was supposed to pick her up. He stopped at a signal in Tidmouth and talked to James, who was shunting his coaches together one at a time for his next train. When the sirens bled and the explosion happened, James was in shock and urged people to get in the coaches. However, only half of the train was coupled up, and there was no time to grab the shunter's pole and hook them. However, Toby realized that Henrietta would be endangered and might be affected by the blast, and was about to leave when James yelled at him to push the brake coach and two others up the line with him to protect the passengers. Toby didn't listen. The brown blocks fled towards the works. James furiously pulled the coaches out of the station as fast as possible, while the tram headed right straight towards the blast. The stranded passengers panicked as the blast shattered the glass canopy, as shards rained down upon them, cutting their faces. Some ran for the hills, others stayed in the station. All have left by now, but it explains why the interior of the offices were completely trashed. Toby proceeded to cry, saying how he was sorry, and how he just wanted Henrietta to be safe. Honestly, I was glad he was safe. I learned that wood isn't affected by radiation, so it made logical sense he was fine. However, a voice called out from inside of him out of the blue, in a deep, groggy voice, which said something like, "It's all your fault, Toby. You were greedy and made them suffer." We peeked inside, and what we saw was horrifying. Toby's smokebox had become sentient, a mangled face which resembled one of a truck, with heat burns on the left side of its face. It was located right behind where Toby's would be. That's when it hit me. He wasn't mumbling to himself earlier. He was talking to the voice in his head. After waiting around for a bit longer, we decided to head back down the line. We were not going to risk going down the Farquhar branch line, because God knows what could be on those tracks. We also didn't want to risk Toby or Fireface getting injured. So Edward and I conceived a plan for us to push him down the line. We also found a bit of coal in the truck, so we coupled that behind us as well, and started to head back down. As we left, we thought we could hear a horn of some sort, but it could have been the old air raids from a couple days ago malfunctioning. As we traveled on, Toby was breaking down more and more, looking at how desolated the place around him was. The air was full of fog, the sky a dark gray, and no sunshine could be seen. It was like someone turned off the lights and closed the blinds on the world. Edward, being the wise sage he was, used his words to calm Toby down and reminding him they would find Henrietta. While he was talking, and while Charlie was taking a drink from a canteen, we felt a sudden jerk as Toby applied his brakes. We stopped Edward and peered out from the side of the cab. Thomas was steaming idly in front of us with a triumphant smirk. Leonard stuck his head out of the cab, saying how good of a job he did for driving his first engine. We heard Thomas's other cab door open, followed by Fee going down his ladder. Finally, the sound of gravel revealing a mysterious figure. He was rather round, really quite round, but we didn't see him like that. To us, he seemed to be our shining light in the deep dark pit. Sir Bertram Topham Hatt. We decided to go back to Tidmouth Sheds, since we needed a place to rest for the night, as well as the place to ask Topham about what the hell was going on. We shunted Toby onto a siding beside the breakdown crane, which still had its arms out after freeing some trucks, blocking its path. Thomas was moved beside Toby and Edward on the turntable. We took some wood we found and made a fire, so the four of us could sit around and discuss what the hell was going on. Topham explained the answers to a bunch of questions we'd been asking for a while. He was at Tidmouth when the blast happened, and was planning to board James's train when it hit. He was cut a bit on the top of his head when his top hat was blown off, followed by the shower of broken glass. The man took refuge in the office and called up the bus services to get them to rescue the passengers who hid in the station, announcing his plan afterwards to the stranded individuals in hiding. Afterwards, he snatched his hat back and quickly made his way to the parking lot, heading to the sheds. Running with such a large figure took him a while, but when he hit the sheds, it was a mess. Trucks with mangled, disfigured faces were off the tracks and jammed into the turntable. He could hear the sound of Thomas in the sheds, and was shocked to see what happened to the engine. Bertram took a moment and comforted the tank engine, and told him he could help. With an old hand car he found in the siding, he managed to push the crane into a position where he could free the trucks blocking the turntable, and free the engine, and release the brakes to move him to the water tower. After he heard the sound of an engine coming, he hid until the coast was clear. The engine he heard was Edward, and he only found out after Leonard spotted him near the cranes. Topham declared that he knew this was no ordinary accident. There was someone behind this, and he had a hunch on who it was. He didn't tell us, but he did mention he had a spotty past with them. Whoever it could have been, they must really wanted to ruin everything he loved on this island. As we had our small bonfire, I could hear Thomas and Edward discussing who it could have been. Thomas said it could have been Diesel, but Edward told him that Diesel was sent back to the mainland years ago. It was nice seeing someone Edward could talk to again. We decided to get some sleep early, since we were going to try and meet back up with Henry and the others the next day. Despite everyone's chatty mood, Toby was silent, looking extremely tense. I'll try and steam him up tomorrow morning to cheer him up. So much had just happened in the span of an hour. It's insane. We woke up to Toby having an episode with Fireface, and he sounded like he was fighting for control. He was begging for it to stop, and was able to roll himself back and forth, like somebody pacing in circles while in deep thought. Something was going to happen, and I woke up the others. We stood back as Toby screamed in pain, his bell ringing continuously. He was at his breaking point, the voice inside of him telling him to end it, that he was just a pile of wood ready to rot. Toby told Thomas to take care of Henrietta, and then it happened. Topham knew what was going to happen and ran towards the engine, who had taken him out on their holiday trip all those years ago. But it was too late. The tram engine rolled back and slammed his wooden body into the arm of the breakdown crane in front of him, which struck straight into his front and face. The sound of splintering wood and flesh was heard as the tram engine fell apart. The arm struck Fireface too, and the hook snagged its face and killed it on impact. It was one of the most gruesome scenes I had ever witnessed. Topham, Charlie, Leonard, and I watched in horror. Topham fell to his knees and broke down crying in front of the collapsed shell of his beloved number 7. He tried to consolidate him, but he did something none of us expected. He got up and took off his jacket. He laid it down upon the remains of the engine, and with his top hat as well. It was a final send-off to our favorite tram before we had to go. Surprisingly, it was interrupted by the sound of 2 horns blaring. From the lines beside the shed, Mavis, Daisy, a fuel tanker, and a van pulled alongside. The sight was shocking. Mavis had part of a stone truck on her front, much like Henry, but it only covered her front rear near the buffers. But it had bullet markings on her body with cracked windows. Her cow catches, however, were covered in dirt, dust, and what I can only assume is blood. Daisy, on the other hand, was quite different. She was boarded up with wooden boards and track sleepers, covering most of her windows. The most surprising thing, however, was her lack of makeup, which her fitter usually painted on her every morning. Instead of her blush and eyeshadow, she had what looked to be wall paint under her eyes. She was full to the brim with workers armed with guns and machines that could be used as weapons, like shovels, pickaxes, and nail guns. We gathered around after making sure people weren't mutated and asked what happened. Apparently, the quarry was attacked by people in lorries and started to shoot down at the workers from the cliffside. Luckily, it was a blasting day, and they had blown the ledge where they were shooting from. Workmen were brawling those men like a professional wrestling match. Mavis ran over some that were trying to block her track and managed to escape with a van, a truck, and a fuel tanker before they could blow it up. The van they had contained rail replacement sleepers and equipment, and they decided to lay low with one of the canvas barriers stored in the van, using it as camouflage. Moving at the slowest speed possible, eventually they found Daisy in her shed, which was detached from the line as it had been blown up. The living workmen who stayed with Mavis in the truck were experts at fixing rails. With the supplies they had in the van, they worked stealthily to roll her onto the line off the siding. The points were quite a pain to temporarily repair, but after a few days, we managed to get her back on the main line. To protect themselves, they used the old truck Mavis had to make a shield in case they ran over anyone else over, and some of the remaining planks and sleepers were fastened to Daisy. After fending off the last of the people with guns in hiding, they started to honk their horns for attention, since they felt they could locate the survivors in the general vicinity. After not being able to locate anyone, they made their way to Tidmouth sheds. We all decided that it would be best to stick together and get going. We didn't realize something. We went to use some of the coal Edward had in the truck we found at Tidmouth, but Topham told us it wasn't Welsh coal. The thing was, it didn't make a difference. Maybe we were wrong about the Welsh coal immunity. While we were going down the line, we heard a tonal whistle behind us. We saw a frantic Scottish engine barreling down the line and screeching brakes. Douglas had stopped beside us and instantly yelled, "Where's Donny?" Edward told Douglas the last time he saw him was when he was going down the branch lines of the harbor and feared the worst, that he must have died in the explosion. Douglas didn't want to hear it and held on to hope despite this. He decided to stick with us and join our cavalcade of survivors. We just found Boco, James, and a train full of workers stopped on the main line outside of Crosby with no fuel. We checked on everyone to make sure they were okay, and they did the same for us. Now, this information that I'm about to write down might be a bit inaccurate, but since there are multiple sources saying the same thing, I'll take their word for it. Apparently, Boco was driven to the docks against his will. He was told by his driver that nothing was wrong, and he was just overreacting. Upon his arrival, many people with guns and tools were about, guarding the area, and stopped them to check on the driver. He stopped Boco in his siding and gave him a chance to look around and process what he was seeing. Salty, the dockyard shunter, was derailed and gutted out. He was just an empty shell. White graffiti on his side said "Yo ho ho." Donald was present there as well. The Scottish twin looked horrified and was just trying to communicate to Boco quietly, but they were too far away to talk quietly to each other. Bill and Ben, who had been mutated, were originally hiding from the men, approached Boco, trying to get him to help them. Boco's yells and shock alerted the men around them and rushed toward the engines. The big diesel realized his mistake and told the twins to run. In their current state, they could only move at snail's pace, and it didn't take long for the armed men to butcher the two. Boco closed his eyes, since he just couldn't bear to watch his friends get killed. He heard the sounds of impact, gunshots, and hammers. During the confrontation with the China Clay twins, civilians and workers who had been hiding in buildings decided to strike, attacking the people in a surprise attack. During this battle, Donald's driver ran over to his engine, started to steam him up with his boiler dry, and tightened his safety valve shut. That was a recipe for disaster. After the battle had ended, Salty's driver hopped in Boco and got the workers and the remaining men who had surrendered into the vans and brake van. Donald was screaming in pain as the smoke box was melting from the inside. The workmen had forgotten about him, and Boco tried to drive over to him to let the workers cool him down by unsticking his safety valve, but it wasn't soon enough, and Donald's boiler exploded. Boiler cladding shot in all directions like a grenade shell, impacting some of the trucks on his train, both injuring and killing a few captives and survivors. His tubes shot out from his sides and through his face. His entire body was busted. I have not seen a boiler explosion before, but how the survivors were describing it, it must have been horrifying. It took them a while to clean up the damage and clear the line from the hot and heavy boiler tubes. They could not salvage much from Donald, and made their way back to the main line. On their journey, they found James, who had been looking worse than before. His left eye socket had grown a mouth and had sharp fangs protruding. He had derailed after busting through a set of buffers and was all alone, stubbing into the dirt. The workers from Boco's train worked together to re-rail him onto the trucks and pulled him back on the rails with some rope, despite him crying, asking them to let him die. Boco had to push the red engine along due to the fact that none of the people who were with them in the consent knew how to drive a steam engine. They ran out of fuel a day or two ago and were surviving with the supplies in the vans Boco was pulling. Douglas was in shock after hearing this and left the group instantly and sped down the branch line, despite the others trying to stop him. He's probably going to check on his brother, and I know he's going to be hit hard emotionally. We had a lot to process. This is the second time we have heard about these people attacking individuals, and we're positive it's definitely a planned attack now. Topham was planning on interviewing the attacker they had captured to get to the bottom of this. Edward had a small conversation with the red-headed to make sure he was okay, and after a bit, James tried to push forward and become hopeful, despite being the creature he had become. He told Topham he wanted to tell him something after they stopped at the camp. We have to get to Henry now. I'll write this after we settle for the night. We arrived at Kildane to find the group, Henry and everyone else. Henry was wearing his shield and was decked out with his metal cladding on the side of his wheels for protection. Thomas had an emotional reunion with Annie and Clarabelle and vowed to never leave them again, as they are currently the only close friends he has left. While workers and survivors joined one another, some of them hugged, being family members or friends who had been separated. I managed to get a hold of Paul and talk to him about the coal, and how I didn't think it stopped the effects of the engines. He thought about the same thing and was questioning his theory yesterday. Topham wanted to interview one of the men who surrendered and told me to keep note of what he tells us. Oh my god, Topham was ruthless to this dude. I've never seen this man become so angry. After enough torture, the dude finally fessed up. He's part of an underground organization with the sole intention of ruining the railway. Many other workers on the railway apparently were a part of this organization, like Felix, William, and Colin. He wouldn't say who he worked for or what he was receiving for doing these heinous acts, but he told Topham he deserved it. The controller grabbed a gun and pointed it in the middle of his head and told him to keep telling him more. And that's when it all came out. There was no radiation all along. The blast was real, but it wasn't a meltdown. It was multiple gigantic explosives set to look like one. The engines weren't being affected by anything natural, but a scientifically engineered chemical created to deform skin and cause unusual skin growth, mutations, and body developments at a variety of speeds. And with that, it also gives the injected individual temporary memory loss, and after a brief moment, they wouldn't even know they were infected. It all made sense now. Thomas, James, the trucks, and everyone else who would have gotten these modifications wouldn't have remembered anything at all. I asked Topham to pause for a moment and went to Edward and asked him what happened in Knapford a couple days back when the people were in hiding went to check out MC Bun for food. I remember them screaming, and that was the last we ever heard from them. But Edward said he couldn't remember anything like that. I can only assume Edward was injected as well. But it could have been the wrong chemicals since he doesn't seem to be mutated in the slightest. I asked the others, and both James and Thomas confirmed a gap in their memory, where they were fine one moment and disfigured the next. I made my way over to Topham again and confirmed the prisoner's information. The controller wanted more info about what they were doing with the engines. The man said nothing until Bertram turned off the safety. He finally gave in and said they were planning on killing the engines in ways that looked completely accidental and scrapping their bodies for metal on the black market, since Sodor engine scrap is both collectible and believed to have unique scientific or magical properties since the engines are alive. He then started to taunt the controller in many inhumane ways, and that pushed him to the edge. Topham only had one question left for the man. Who do you work for? The man replied in a raspy voice.
Your old pal, Peter Theodore Boomer.
I turned around as a gunshot was heard, and a heavy thump hit the ground.